Okay, we're recording. So welcome to the Cheltenham WordPress Meetup. It's been a while, but finally got around to organising something. So I'd just like to say thank you to our speaker, Tammie Lister, who's going to talk to us about letting themes be themes and what full site editing means for themes, and covering the new theme.json configuration that was introduced as of WordPress 5.8. So thank you to the WordPress community team as well that have allowed us to use the Zoom account, which looks a little bit confusing, but I won't go into that right now. So yeah, if I can hand over to you, Tammie, sorry, and take it away with your presentation. Welcome, Tammie Lister.
Thank you so much. So first of all, a little bit about me. So I've been involved in WordPress for quite a little while, and also the editor pretty much from the start. And currently I'm exploring in a number of areas what this new space means. And when I say new, what the new tools mean, what theming means in this space. And right at the end, I'm going to share a list of resources so you can be sure to grab them. It's going to be URL and they'll be there. And also I would welcome you to contribute to them as well. It's not really going to be a demo. There are going to be some things shared, but this is more of an overview and some talking points around that. So a lot of what I'm going to share is, as I said, still a work in progress. There have been some releases, but the road is still being shaped, and that's where we all get to collaborate. Before considering how easy something is or not, it's essential to look at how hard it was and its situation and context. So like many, and probably many of you here, I've been around themes for quite a while and a little bit of time. Those of us that have worked around issues and those problems, we felt maybe it got better in each release, but what we thought was maybe getting easy was often getting further from the starting state that we were, not actually the process itself getting easier. The WordPress way was often said half as a joke, but mainly as a reality of the acceptance you had to do things a particular way to work around. And the paths for themes, well, when I talk about this, this really is for theme builders, those that created themes, call them developers, theme designers, whatever title. They were people who often had a combination of skills because they had to. So it often feels like it started with Kubrick. I don't know about you, but it feels like that for me. And it didn't, but it kind of feels like it did. Whilst themes as a concept were around before, many really got their theme moment with this theme. It's what so many learnt from, explored and dove into to understand. But things rapidly seemed to get complex from that point. And it was often that case of working around WordPress. How many times did you say, oh, it's the WordPress way, and accept something, or just deal with a workaround? Some chose to adopt a framework. These sprung up seemingly everywhere because they made sense. They often were a closed ecosystem, so you had to choose your path very, very carefully. Others meant for underscores or these other unthemed options. And meanwhile, the working around issues continued. Options piled up. Themes had to compensate more and more and more. It almost felt like this never-ending cycle, and the line between a theme or a plugin became incredibly blurred. Theme developers had incredible technology debt and stacks to maintain. It was just all a lot and very far from the simple concept of a theme. Themes became everything. Themes had become less about design and more about how much they could do. Designers stopped, honestly, getting excited. Developers stopped being interested as much. And I don't say this to be harsh. I say this because I saw it and I experienced it. Those that were still creating themes did so in not easy situations, and something had to change. The creativity was being lost under all this complexity. But all of that was about those that created themes. What about those that wanted to create content, to change something? Well, it was even more complicated, even more constrained. They often had to know a framework or a secret combination of plugins. If they picked a theme, they would end up often without knowing buy into a framework. Then that framework was like learning a new system on top of WordPress because the system was working around the WordPress way, and then they had to know the systems way on top of the WordPress way. And if they didn't have time to DIY, they had to pay someone to get even the simplest update done. The concept of an open source space where you owned your content and could easily edit was a lie in that case. If someone did change themes, well, everything was lost and something happened in translation. What you started with did not end up with what you ended up with. The entire concept of themes is really that you should have the content split from the start, but that wasn't the case. Everything was so tied, it was this tangled knot mess that many feared to go near. I kind of think of it like this Swiss Army knife, that this is created as the ultimate tool, and spoiler, it doesn't work because it's pretty useless. It has too much. It wasn't the intent of themes to become this Swiss Army knife, to become too much. They really just did too much. They had only one job really to do, and that was to present content. And that's the one job that themes should do well. They were so busy trying to do all the things, be everything. They just didn't end up doing that very well. So something had to change, and something did change. And that was the editor. Gutenberg was released. Now, this didn't change themes that very day, no, but it put us on a path to get there. And it's worth noting that many people in the project originally for the editor came from theme backgrounds. The passion for themes is actually strong in WordPress, and like many open source projects, it's one of our biggest appeals that we embrace designer and developer hybrids. We have this form that can celebrate creativity and allow people to express the individuality of their site with a simple click. It was time to return to that. Whilst WordPress had changed, so has the world outside WordPress. How people expect to create and interact has adapted, grown. The editor recognized this with the content itself by focusing on the block, which is a natural way to process content if you think about pattern recognition. This also translates nicely into how you think about building up a visual site as well, block by block. People want more art direction, tools, and the ability to make it like that themselves and not have to pay someone to do it. The world is full of services enabling them to do that, and WordPress has to bring some of that enabling to the market sense. So let's dive into what's now available, as it's a great point to start thinking where things are going and how themes can be allowed to get back to just being themes. But before I go too much further, it needs saying, if you want the latest features, you have to use the plugin, not just the WordPress release itself. This is how you get the experimental features in everything. It's the default state, but it's the current state, but you are setting up the future if you start using these things now. Theme.json is one of the biggest of the new features. To sum up what this is, if kind of giving an analogy, it would be a recipe for the theme. And by having it in your theme, it activates full site editing along with the design tools for the blocks. So how does it work? Well, if you think of it as setting those settings, it's quite confusing, up so they appear for things like global styles, things that a block supports, and you activate this. Global styles is the interface for theme.json, visual representation of that, the things that you change. You can also turn on and off features, setting boundaries for customization, that real granular control. And when I talk about block supports, what do I mean? Well, it's things like colors, fonts, for example, color palettes and custom color support, or links, colors, borders, all these different ones. There are also experimental settings. Experimental is a flag used to indicate if something is a feature still a work in progress. Remember I said there's some features that are experimental in the plugin. Currently, this includes settings such as flexbox, font family, borders. And these are things that you can find in the block.json file. Every block has these, and those files are a treasure trove for each block to discover things. And this, for example, is from the group one. You can also declare custom values in your theme.json to use throughout. So you could declare these margins in your custom values and then use them throughout your theme.json and wider if you wanted to, which is really, really useful. Patterns are, in simple terms, a collection of blocks. They are powerful, and you can both declare them in a theme or even them in a plugin. There's even a directory for them. I mention them here as these kind of are a critical part of themes in the future. They allow a complex structure like this to not be inside the theme files, to be swappable between any theme. And that's really incredible. Even more than that, someone can browse, they can click, and they can add a pattern easily into a theme they're using. That is really, really empowering. And templates, they're not new to WordPress. We've had page templates for a while, and now they are front and center of the experience. You not only can declare them in the traditional way, you can have this unique styling created right there on the page in the site editor for that content. For example, you could create a custom 4.4 page or a post that displays coding examples using a dark background when the rest of your site was using a lighter background. There are so many possibilities for art direction using this. You can also declare these in a theme. There's an interface that accesses both of these in the site editor and a kind of pared down version on your page editor itself. Another feature is page templates. So kind of think of these as little pieces of swappable micro templates. Headers or footer is a good example of these, and you can reuse them across your sites. You might have a theme with a few headers. This is a really common thing to do in theming. You'd have like this if-else statement, and it'd be really lengthy to do in code, but you can now visually swap these really easily and just have them to swap in and out. Perhaps you have several options of content to swap in and out. Well, that's what page template parts allow you to do. You can swap these in the site editor. So all of that is quite a lot of theory. How does this work in practice? So I'm going to have a little bit of a look. I'm going to show you some little videos of the editor itself, and then some code examples of a theme I've been pottering on. So here is the full site editor. It's not that unexpected from the content
Well, I don't
editor.
know what's going on there with this thing.
From the content editor itself, welcome. Global styles are powered by the theme.json being the interface. Remember all those block supports we talked about? These are at the sides. As you edit, you are saving site-specific parts and templates. These aren't impacting the theme itself. You aren't overwriting anything in the theme files. You're just doing it for your site itself. A theme's providing those defaults. So if someone does this, they're just
See if I
for
can
their
get it back
site.
up again. So I'll get out of here, maybe try this.
And they're the same for styles as well. So your files are going to be preserved all the way through. One key feature is the ability to export. This is actually a beneficial process. You can create things, export, and put them in your theme. If you wanted to create in the site editor, you'd be able to do this and then just copy them into your theme files. It's also a great way to do a backup of your files so that you know that you have them. So here is an example of a theme. As we're talking about themes, I wanted to kind of have a little bit of a look at one. So this structure isn't that unexpected from a theme, but the biggest point is probably how light this looks if you think about themes. Now, this is going to be different for every single person, as is themes. Everyone's going to have their different paths. Some full site editing themes have more CSS, and some are going to use Sass, and some are not going to use Sass. Some are going to be child themes, and some are not going to be. Right now, everyone is exploring their own route. So,
Mr. Stringy.
This theme is intended to use as little
Doing
CSS
good.
as I can. Is it possible to mute him? Thank you so much. This is intended to use as little CSS as possible. And I'm also trying to use as many of the new features as possible in theming. The theme.json is again this recipe. So all the elements, the palettes, the duo tags, it's got all those goodies set in it and everything set up. It's also worth saying you can limit things in your theme.json as to on and off. Remember I said that. So you don't have to have access to everything if you wanted to control that a little bit for your users. Theme.json also works with block-specific styling. So you can actually declare, so for the code block, you could declare specific styling that only happens for that code block throughout, or the quote block. I love that because it means I don't have to do quite lengthy custom CSS that I used to have to do in the past within my theme. And here again, you can use variables that you declare and use throughout your theme.json styles and everywhere. So here you could use colors, and I think this is great. This also removes the need to use other preprocessors because you can use it right in your theme.json that then are WordPress variables you can use throughout your site. So templates are HTML files, very simple. You can see here the blocks themselves and inline styling. And also note, these come from exporting. Remember that little export in the editor? That's just what this is. Template parts can also be seen in this section. You could have more than one, as I said, but remember, these are defaults to be used. The person using the theme can have their own as they create without impacting the theme. And finally, the functions.php file, as all themers know. This file can control experimental features, and it can control, again, that granular control. You still have control over what you set or don't choose to set. So that's been a bit of a journey. We've looked at the past, we've looked at the problems, we've looked a little bit at the new stuff and the existing tools. But what about the future? I love talking about the future. So if you would indulge me, I would like to finish this talk by looking a little bit about the future. And I'd like to look first at the experience. We need to take notice and continue to adapt constantly. At one point, WordPress was out of step, but it's rapidly back in step with what people expect. This is great, but we shouldn't forget how easily it was to get to a place where themes weren't what they should have been in the first place. Themes can be simpler if we let them. The experience can be too. This means not showing everything to everyone all at once. For example, not overwhelming them. There is the ability to enable people through true art direction, from patterns to global styles, but they don't need that all at once. This puts capabilities into people's hands that previously felt incredibly out of reach. But as all people know with that phrase, with great power comes responsibility. It's up to those creating themes and experiences to create something that doesn't confuse and gives good defaults to enable people to have success. Patterns allow someone to make it like that. You see something and you can grab it and you can add it to your site. This is incredible. And this is really, really powerful. It also will only get more empowering once you add functionality and connect plugins more closely with these patterns. The biggest excitement about the experience has to be also that themes can switch seamlessly without affecting the content. This honestly has never been possible once you get beyond default content, even though we always hope for it. So imagine if a theme was as easy to change as your t-shirt. No matter what your mood, you could change it. You know, let's even bring back those theme switches of the early noughties. Themes can return to being about style, beautiful, experimental, and amazing pieces of art. But what about the tools? Specifically for those creating themes. I tend to think about theme creators, not theme developers, because that's then including those who will just use the site editor, and that's fine. And those who will dive into the code itself, and that's also fine. We should provide tools for different people to do different things. Themes are open again to as many as possible, resulting in a wider range of designs and theme art. Design tools are something inspiring. And what do I mean by these? Well, these are tools that activate across blocks to allow the creation of designs, from adaptive design through to color controls. There are many coming, and it's fascinating. By having these tools everyone can use, they have an interface people can trust. Theme creators can know to support them, but also using the themes, they can learn once these interfaces and then be able to use any of these themes. They don't have to then learn a different framework and then use different tools. They would just know. You only have to learn one way. As I said in this quote, I know it's quite a lengthy quote, but to summarize, these intrinsic design principles have been long awaited. It's a huge step forward, and avoid these stack of plugins and these ways around, working around the WordPress way. And it's also truly responsive, because quite honestly, we've been working our way around responsive with these little breakpoints that we've been having to fix people to. Things should just adapt beautifully to the device that you're trying to work on. So full site editing is just getting started, and it can feel super tempting to judge what we have now, but it's more of a prototype that we're all getting to help shape. you think of it a little bit like clay. We're all forming together in a public workroom. That's why it's only activated when the plugin is, and why so much of this is under experimental flags. As things mature, that's when this is going to get really exciting and powerful. In the end, the biggest part of this is it's going to let themes be themes. They won't have to be everything anymore. People can learn WordPress. They won't have to learn another framework to change the design or be locked into an ecosystem. And there's going to be a lot of business opportunities from that. From companion plugins through to themes are just going to be an exciting space again. Themes are becoming a chore to maintain, and this means a freeing of the medium. And yes, it is changing what that word means, but it's changing back to what that word should have been in the first place and was. A return to what they're always meant to be, a style you applied to your content, your site. We're all about to have a kit of incredible tools to use in our work. And it's an exciting time, I think, to create themes again. And that's why I wanted to write this talk. So thank you so much. Here is a link where you can find a list of resources from my talks today. And I'd love to open to have some questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tammie. Apologies about the interruption. I think there was some interesting activity.
There was some life happened. It's all good.
Yeah. Strangely enough, I've had some activity. I just bunged the guy in the. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, and I just bunged him in the waiting room in the end, and he left. But we've had an influx of people wanting to join them, but I don't recognise their names, and they're not on the list, so they're not coming in. So apologies about that. I hope it hasn't spoiled anybody's enjoyment of Tammie's talk, because I think it was quite interesting. A lot of exciting things coming in WordPress, I think. For those of you that are here, if you want to put your hand up, and then unmute yourself, or put your hand up and then I'll invite you to ask your questions, if there aren't any already in the chat. Any questions?
I'm wondering about the experimental nature of all of these things. It's rather confusing to me that everything is experimental, and we're all talking about it. I would have thought that it would be better to have a feature working and then talk about it, and then develop that feature so that it would be full-blown and easily passed on to everyone.
I think there's a couple of things to pull out from that, if I may. One, not everything's experimental, so good news. Some things are, you are right, but themes are complex. There are so many different layers, how things interact from styling. So experimental often means, how do borders impact across multiple different themes? How do they impact across different child themes? How do they impact across different situations? And there is only so much testing you can do for that until you experiment in the real world. And experiment, what we mean is, it's probably work. Well, it does work. It works, is what our experimental flag means. It's just, it needs feedback. And with themes, we need feedback in context. We need feedback of, is this the right tool for theme builders? And themes is a two-way process. It's those that use themes and those that create themes. And to get feedback from those that create themes, you need to release the tools for them to create from. So you need to release the stuff pretty early for them to create from, so that people can use them. Themes is very complicated. It's not as easy as, say, releasing a product, putting it through beta and just doing it that way. And I understand that sometimes it can feel that everything's experimental, but there are things that aren't experimental and are very out there and able to be used. There are some very robust and working full-site editing themes that, even though they had that caveat, they're very strong and they work. So I think it's an opportunity, and that's part of open source as well. I think we have to remember this is an open source project, and part of open source is feedback, and part of theming is really tools that you create and you use. So we all are getting to shape these things, and these are things we're going to use forever. And that's the way kind of theming has always been, this two-way conversation. And it's great we're having it about the new phase of this.
I understand the idea of conversation about something. That's no problem. But I've had a difficulty with Gutenberg right from the beginning because it didn't seem to work very well.
Yeah.
And
I think
now, and that becomes a problem because when you're doing the blocks and you want to create blocks and so forth, you're stuck to a plugin and it only works in the plugin. You can't create something in a simple theme, but you have to have the plugin, and possibly it will work or not work in the theme that you're working on. I've had difficulty with Gutenberg, and I thought it was, we need to somehow make it rock solid so that it's actually working as an interface before we start doing lots and lots of things with the blocks.
I think it's a chicken and egg. Sorry for that analogy, but you're not going to get you're not going to get many people to use an editor unless they have a theme, right? Or to display on the front. So you need these tools, and it's a complex problem. There is always like someone will have an answer, and then someone will have a counterpoint, and there's all sorts of opinions, and it's open source. And I think that it's a great melting pot of ideas, and that's how we adapt and change. This is, I'm going to caveat with, this is like my opinion, but my opinion is we should, Gutenberg as an editor is pretty stable. It's in core and stable. And the editor is separate from the plugin. The plugin is experimental. The release of WordPress that has editor is different. That is like, that has tried, tested features. That's separate now. They are different. They are different entities. And we are talking about different things now. And really what theming is it's going to open up this experience to more people. And until we have themes that are using these tools, and until we have tools that themers can use, and until we have an easier way to use blocks and theming, because honestly, I've tried to make a theme that interacts with blocks without using these tools. And it looked like I was attacking CSS with multiple lines, because you had to do almost every line of block CSS, and it's just complicated and it's not great. So this is about making theming work in this space. And it is hard and it's not easy, but this is a way to give the tools to progress and allow us to make this next step forward. And it sometimes feels like we're in that awkward teenage step again, or we're toddlers and we're tripping up again, but we have to do that to change these little things along the way. And I sympathize with you if you stub your toe on things. I stub my toe on site editor things. There's things when I've tried to do in the site editor with theming, and I'm like, why did it not do this? Or why did that do? There was a thing the other day where typography didn't work, and it now works. I have no reason why it didn't work, and it worked. Things like that. But I'm giving feedback and I'm interacting because I know that I want these tools to create these themes, and that is part of like that conversation. But the editor itself is in core, so it's a different thing of like a couple of years ago. Like what I'm talking about with this conversation is shaping the tools that will create the themes that we use going forward, and the way that we make themes going forward. So yeah, this conversation was all about experimental in that sense.
Okay, fine. It's just that we talk about Gutenberg and then we talk about experimental, and then I get confused. But I'm a very simple fellow, so no, I am. Oh. And I think that if I'm getting confused, then a lot more people are getting confused as well.
It's a good check. I think one of those things that I'm going to check that is that I should be clear with my language. So thank you for bringing that clarity. And I think that's something really important. Another good one is how we use template and template parts. Super confusing. We're using some random words and being very confusing about them. So we need to make sure we all give feedback and we give clarity around some of these words. So I think it's really important, but we also have to use this stuff and move forward. And I think that that's the thing, that we have to explore and we have to move forward. And I realize I sound like some
I agree with you that we do have, I agree. We do have to move forward and we do have to experiment, but we have to somehow make things easy for people to use. And so far, Gutenberg has not been easy for me to use. But that's my problem. Don't worry about it.
No, I think if I could just interject and just add my pennies. I don't want it to become too much of a debate, but I kind of get what Stillman's saying. And I think with WordPress is that it's opened up a lot of opportunity for a lot of people to publish content. And I think that's the whole movement of WordPress, is making it easy for people to publish content. And through that journey, things have to be made easier and things change. That's not necessarily to say that it's going to change and you're not going to be able to do it the old way. You can still do it the old way. It's just that WordPress wants to open up more to a bigger audience and helping users to do things that they don't have to rely on web developers to do. And I think that's a fair point. Do you agree?
It's also, the editor itself is being iterated too. So all these hitches and these pain points, surface them. Like, don't feel you have to be quiet about your pain points. Please don't ever be quiet about any pain points or any issues. Like, say them. If you are able to, create them as issues. And I say able to because I don't want to presume, because honestly, making a GitHub issue or a track issue, not the easiest thing in the world. And I don't mean that.
It helps everyone, right?
Yeah, because your experience, maybe it is your experience, maybe it is just you on your own mind island, but potentially and probably not. there is a high probability that you are representing a lot of people that haven't got that voice and aren't going to do that. And there's also a lot of iterations to do that. There are a combination of plugins and there are a combination of experiences. It may not get into the core editor to adapt that experience. However, there have been many ideas planted on track or GitHub that have sprung up as plugins that have then been created by people that have made things better. And the experience we have today, when I was involved in phase one, it is not the experience that is today of the editor. It looks very different. And the editor of today will be very different than the editor of 6 months, a year. And that is because of feedback. It is not because of the team that is making it. It is because of feedback and input. Only, that's how open source works. You make a ticket, you give some feedback, and things change.
Move forward. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we do have some other questions that are backed up. And I know that Johnny had his hand up. So if you want to ask your question, Johnny, I know that you.
I didn't actually have a question. I think the point has been comfortably covered now.
Okay.
I would just leave Stillman with this final thought. Like, trust me, over the years, we've all had our challenges with Gutenberg, and we're not getting into that. But what to think about here is, like, in a way, it's a stepping stone to what Tammie's just shown us. That was like the sort of first iteration of where it could go. And I think even when, I'm going to just presume this, even when it was a mere baby, the back-end Gutenberg project, on the grapevine, I kind of heard was always destined to go where Tammie has shown us where it's going. So yeah, we've all had our pains, but ultimately now we're starting to get to the juicy bits. I'm hyped about it. I'm proper hyped about it. Thank you for a wonderful presentation, Tammie.
Thank you. I think
Thanks, Johnny.
It is. It's not the easiest thing to experience because, and I've been with WordPress a long time, and I've been part of like the team making a change. That doesn't mean I find change any easier sometimes, right? And when I implement, like I experience problems or I find the site editor doesn't do things, I like want to lie on the floor and stamp the floor. That's my reaction to things. Honestly, I wish I could behave like a toddler half the time, because they seem to have so much better reactions than I am allowed to as an adult. It seems so much better. Because it's frustrating. And sometimes this stuff, I just want it there tomorrow. I want it finished, but I know that by exploring this, I get there. So thank you for your feedback. I don't want you to ever feel that you're not being heard. I would encourage you to be heard and feel you are being heard. Anyone.
That's great. That's good advice. Mike from Spokane did have his hand up, but he's put his hand down now.
I just want to make a couple of clarifications here, and I think you may have covered it, but over here in the States, the nomenclature is that the Gutenberg isn't the editor anymore. When it first came out, it was a mess. And if you tried it a few years ago, I could appreciate your frustration. But now it's the block editor is core, and Gutenberg is the beta, the new stuff coming. And so if you want to be on the cutting edge, but if you're just building a website now and you use a block enabled theme with maybe a blocks plugin, you can build websites now in a few hours. It's really pretty amazing, and it works pretty fast once you get the hang of it. But if you're trying to do something with a really old theme and you're trying to use the experimental plugin and you're trying to, you're going to have some problems. That's the way it is. But in what Tammie's, I think, saying is that once they get the fundamental blocks in place, which they've done now, it allows for that experimentation that comes in, and you can adopt what you want as you go. And there's always going to be growing pains. But if you're frustrated with the block editor itself, you might go back and look at that and see what theme you're using and what version you're using, because it is not the same that it was 3 years ago. So much improved. And thanks again for the presentation. It was great.
Thank you very much, Mike. And I do want to apologize for taking over. It was, I'm just a naive fellow working with WordPress. But
No,
I'm
not at all.
very thankful for your presentation, because this is the way it's going. And I do hope that it actually goes in this direction so that we can all use it.
Can I say, you say naive fellow, but you make WordPress, like we all make WordPress over here. That's because it's open source. So I don't dismiss. Like it's awesome. Like and I say that because everyone's opinions is awesome. Like I learn something every time I talk to someone, and it changes my. Like I'm now going to be like, oh, why am I confusing where I say experiment? And that's a great tip for me when I'm using things. And Mike's just giving me a good tip on how to use like different terms. And I think that's the big one, like the terms we use currently, that is so important going forward. The terminology and how we address things, we have to be very careful of learning. And learning and documentation is like the biggest areas that are going to be huge going forward, because theming is complex and we can get all arty and excited. And me and Johnny are getting bouncing up and down, very excited about all the art stuff and very excited. But we also need documentation and the language clarity to go with that as well. So thank you so much.
Okay, well, I'll explain that I trained as a philosopher, so that's why I like clarity of language. So forgive me, I will now mute myself and say thank you very much for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Marvelous. I think Paul Nola, is that right, has a question? You have your hand up.
Myself there. Okay, Alan. Hi. Yeah, for me, I guess, so to explain, I make WordPress websites for agencies, basically, so white label. So I build websites for agencies. Until not that long ago, 2 or 3 months ago, I guess it was Divi. I hate to swear, but Divi is what, it's what the world uses. And I build websites in Divi, get frustrated like everyone else, but I've now started a YouTube channel to teach people how to use Divi, and I really deep dived into Divi. So that's what I've been doing until someone said, well, one of the agencies I work for said, I'm switching to Oxygen because of the temporary sort of speed issues with Divi, which Divi tells us are going to be sorted in no time at all. So I've now just built the first half a dozen sites in Oxygen, and I am now completely split down the middle, basically. But you know, two different ways of working. I love being able to get at the code, tinker with stuff. So I guess where I'm going here is that there's different audiences for this concept of whole site editing. There is someone that thinks because they've seen a very short YouTube video that building a WordPress website is easy, and that, you know, there's no point employing someone to do it because they can build a shop for their cakes they're making at home in WordPress, and you know, and they get, some of them get there, most of them don't. They need help, and I guess is this set of tools more likely to be aimed at that sort of market, or is it more likely to be aimed at the agency market, people like me that's making websites all day every day, or is it going to be all things to all people?
Yes. And I think that that's the thing. There's some magic in it, and I kind of briefly, because it was so fast, I'm sorry, there's so much to cover, but blog supports, I always go back to blog.json. It's like my favorite file in the world. I'm sorry, I like live in these files. Every block has a blog.json file, and in it has like what the block supports. And they're like, as I kind of said, they're like little juicy files of amazing, because you see like what experimental stuff's coming, and you can turn on and off a lot of that stuff. So you can have, if you wanted to, like, if you were a freelancer and you wanted to release a theme and you didn't want someone touching anything, you didn't want custom palettes, you didn't want anything, you can turn all that off in the theme level. And that was initially one of the big, like, oh, how do we turn all that off? Because we don't want someone to have custom palettes. We don't want like neon pink. I love it, but you know, we don't want neon pink and whatever. We want them to have their branding palette. We want them to have this. That also gets really, really critical as you get up to agencies, right? You have branding, you have typography, you have all these set things. So that you can lock down. You can do that in theme.json. But you can also bring in extending, because it's blocks and you can extend it, and you can have block specific styling, and you can have styles that you could have for the blocks, and you could declare patterns in your templates. So you could actually have specific patterns that come with the themes, and you could have templates that come with the themes. So you can imagine if you were creating a large scale, like BBC, let's shoot for the moon, the BBC website, you get that contract and you're still making the BBC website out of WordPress, and you did different templates, and you had different patterns, and you had different styles, and you had different palettes. You could do that by using different patterns and different page templates, and that would be predefined in the theme and different template parts. So you can scale up really fast, and you want to extend that stuff, great, you can just extend it because it's the same interface. So it really is like choose your own adventure. I love those books, I'm old, but it really is that kind of thing. And I think that it's the tools and toys that themers and designers didn't necessarily get when all the block people and all the plugin developers got all those tools. It's now like the themers and the designers get all those tools.
But see, that's interesting, because you're talking about themers and designers in the same breath there, but the designers or the builders, I'm not a designer, I'm a builder. So someone gives me an XD file and I build a website from it. I only get what the themers give me to build that website with. So there's a middle, the themer is the middleman there, and has a...
Well, that depends on the person. The reason I'm going to say that is I'm a designer, right? But I think it also depends on the scale, but this also enables designers to create themes again. Designers, if the designer didn't code, and we actually have this awesome thing where we embrace hybrids in our community, it's amazing, and we have a lot of them, but if you weren't a designer that didn't code, it was very difficult for you to make a theme. Theming was a lot harder than we think. It became pretty difficult to do, unless you use, some of the frameworks were super easy and super like targeted at that, but you had to like that was your thing, that was your ecosystem thing. But if you wanted to just do WordPress, it was really difficult. But a designer, patterns, export, create it in the site editor, use that export function. It actually is, that's how I make my themes currently. I am like making them visually in the site editor. It is moderate levels of success because it's learning, but I do that and then I export, put it into my theme file. It is incredible, just the function of doing that. Export, put it in my theme file and save it, and creating this custom page. It's so nice to be able to have that. Could I go and do the code? Yes, but I'm not going to write like the code of blocks. That's maybe not what I'm going to do, right? Yeah, it's levels. I think we're all working out what this happens. There are also going to be plugins and tools and approaches, and there's going to be bare bones frameworks. Oh, and that's the business opportunities here, which I am so excited. The frameworks that build on top of these, because there was a thing of it's the death of framework. It's the frameworks that build on top of these and take things even further, or the themes that build on top of these, and that's what's going to be super exciting. The tools that are on top of the tools.
Yeah, no, I get that. I get that. The frameworks, again, as now an Oxygen user, you know, I don't use Oxygen without a framework. So I use Oxy Ninja as a framework, and, you know, it just comes with loads of classes and stuff already done for me, you know, and it's easy. So I guess I'm just trying to get to a timing of when this will be the mainstream.
So there's a lot more. So we haven't had like times or anything, but there's a lot more in 5.9.
Okay.
I'm so bad at release numbers. The next one,
5.9 or 5.8,
which is before
something.
Santa. Which is before Santa. So you know.
Okay.
And one of the things which this has, which I think is really exciting, is the typography. Which I don't know if anyone's played around with Clamp. If you want to melt your brain with maths, use Clamp.
Yeah, totally. There's a great site that works it all out for you, responsive typography or something, and you can do it in any unit you want, and it generates a Clamp function for you. It's brilliant. So.
But things like that are being looked at, and you know, we've never had that intrinsic design built into WordPress like as a system. And that is so, like, so many people have tried to do or had to do that to survive as an agency, or had to do that to survive as a framework. So having that and then being able to build on top of that, that's like design happy for me. That's why so many people who were excited about themes are returning to be excited about themes and saying like, this is now something we can. It's easier to do, and people who are theming it like, this is easier to do. You're just going to see it. It's like a new wave of theming, but it's how it should have been. We just had to work around things for a little while.
Excellent, thank you. No, really good talk, really useful.
I'm afraid I have no dates and I have no deadlines for you, but
I think what's interesting about it is you can pretty much build a theme and all its templates without going into any code editor, which is like. Can you imagine the world that opens up for designers that don't code? You know, changing landscape.
Being able to do it in the page editor as well. So that's also the thing. You can do it in the site editor, but if you're like in the page editor, you're like, you know, this page, you know what it could do with blue background. You could suddenly like spin up a new page. Like you literally can do that. New page template, blue background. White text, I don't know, you change the text color using, if you have
shocking
custom
pink.
Or it appears to be the theme. There you go, like you can do that and save it. I will say that editor is like the light editor. It's a little bit less functional than the other one, but I think that's all it needs to be. You then can take that template and really edit it in the other one. But all these editors are being worked on as well. It's just so much better than some of these workflows that we had before with themes, and it's a visual way of connecting with the
Cool, thank you for that, and thank you for your question, Paul. Tammie, Janice mentioned something in chat about the best way that she learns things is to reverse engineer things, and if you had any resources or recommendations for good resources where she could use this?
So the link.
Maybe Janice, you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, literally, I just like kind of like diving into stuff and then seeing how it works and then fiddling with it and usual
So
thing.
I just shared a link in chat.
Oh yeah, I see. Great.
This is a link I shared. I'm trying to, like, because I keep on losing good links because there's so many good links. I'm trying to collect them there. There's also a theme resources repo.
Very cool.
So it's theme experiments repo. Apparently my brain had a blip. And in there's like loads of like theme experiments, and you can just like reverse it. I'm the same. Like, I think like that's how I learned Kubrick, right? Like you went in there, picked it apart, and you did it. So if you find any and you feel inclined, please create an issue, because I'd love to collect them. And I'm Pokemon with these
Thanks very
amazing
much.
links. And just try and have them. I try to do this rather than people following along in the talk. I think it's super difficult sometimes to follow along. I find it difficult. That's why I presume it's difficult.
Excellent. That's a really good resource, I think, as well. So bookmark that if you can. Johnny, you had your hand up again. Did you have another question?
I did have a question this time, actually, Tammie. You showed in the sort of front end editing sidebar options, you just briefly mentioned, you went, oh, we've got page templates and you can swap it from there. Can you touch briefly upon, give us a little bit of action around how page templates are evolving then, please?
Well, it's all just templates is the best way to describe that. The process
is there any cool new stuff? I mean, how does that affect like the front end editing experience? Does it reload with the new page template without kind of, you know, stuff like that? Give us a little nugget here around page template.
I'm not sure what you mean by the front end. So the power of the whole site editor,
full site editing. Full site
editor, the engine bits that run it is templates. You can call them page templates, but templates can be for anything. It can be for a post, it can be for any type of content. So it's kind of page templates plus because it's templates for anything. You still have the hierarchy. So you still have the hierarchy is not gone away. It's still there underneath. So you still have, like, by default, you have like 404 and you have single and you have page. So they're there by default. If you declare them in your theme, it will use those. If not, there's default ones, which is awesome. And that's kind of the great one about a theme now. You don't have to declare every bit of content. It will use certain ones, which is kind of weird. Like when you're creating one, it's this weird thing of like unlearning how you make themes, because some things just happen. And I think one of the things we got very used to with themes was like everything being controlling. Like we had to like do something, otherwise we got like this weird like query loop error. That was one of the biggest things for me, was giving control of the theme, I think, to the process. So you have that, you can change it in a drop down. You can change it at the side. So when you go into site editor, if you're in your post, so if you're in your page, at the side, you can click edit, you can assign it, you can click new, and you can create a new one or edit that page template. So where you had assigning one, you can just edit it. So say you had one that was yellow, we're picking every color at this point. And it was, so full width, it was a full width page template. And you were like, well, okay, I want full width, but I want full width yellow on this one. You could go, okay, new, and you can use that as a base and then just color it yellow. It's so amazing to be able to do that and not have to like go into my editor, you know, query loop block, query loop block. I'm never sure if it's a query loop block or query block. Anyway, the query block is like your engine. That's what powers most of this. You can pull out post content. There's comments, bit of a trick. There's the post comments, but you can also pull out individual comments separately if you want to style them. So if you want to style the form, That took me a little bit while. I was like, oh, it's the whole comments, but you can also, and I started like the whole of it, but you can do individual pieces as well, which is kind of interesting as you dive in. And you have the undo and redo in this editor. So it's still the same Gutenberg editor experience, it's just slightly changed. So you have undo, redo, you have the auto save, you have revisions, you have all those editor things that you would expect. It just looks slightly different. And this is all saved on your machine, not on the theme files, is a good way of putting it as well. Is that enough? Okay.
Can I just ask that is in experimental mode at the moment, full site editing.
Yes.
So you have to have a plugin installed, and then you have to have a full site. Yeah.
Yes.
Do you want to just would you just go over that for the benefit of people that might not know?
Yeah. So
how to
you
set it
have
up
to have a full site editing theme, but you don't just have, and you have to have the plugin of Gutenberg. Those two things together mean that you can activate this. The full site editing theme on its own does not work. It's as far as I know, it's both of those two things together is what gets you these things. And you use it with the caveat that this is experimental. But you really would only be using these features if you were really playing with them at this point. I think there's like maybe 12, 20, there's quite a few things.
How do we find those is there an easy way to find them in the theme?
The link that I just gave, there's a link listed of full site editing themes.
Oh, marvelous.
Carolyn has on her full site, there's a link of themes as well.
Awesome.
There are so many good people in this community collecting all these resources. So just trying to surface them all for people.
Excellent. Great. If anybody has any more questions,
there's a hand up.
Paul, if you want to unmute yourself. Sorry, Paul.
Whoops. It's a bit of a hijack, really. Has anyone else used Divi here? Anyone else use Divi? No. Okay. All right. Don't worry. That's fine. It's just Nick Roach, who's the guy behind it, has literally just put out an announcement in the last 10 minutes that everyone's been waiting for him to release the super 100 score super fast extra no bloat version, and he claims he's just released it. That's all. So it's quite a significant impact I think it'll have on those of us that are stuck with page builders before we get this super new version. But if no one uses it, then it's not news to anyone else, really, but it is to me.
There is a big community of users out there. So
700,000 supposedly. So yeah.
I think there's still
you heard it here
first. There's still will be a community. Yeah. I think that's the thing. Still,
but I would gladly throw it out the window tomorrow. It's like anything that has evolved over a very long period of time, iteratively. We need something like you've been talking about to come along and just take all the bloat out. Elementor's just as bad, or all the the big page builders are full of bloat, and they generate unbelievable mountains of files of CSS that are just not used. It's crazy. So no, this is definitely the way forward, and I can't wait.
I've tinkered with it actually, and I highly recommend if you've got a local environment, is definitely set it up and start playing with it, because like Tammie was saying, anyone's feedback on the terminology, this doesn't make sense or that doesn't make sense, why have you said that, or what does that mean, is really good information back to the core team to discuss whether they need to change it, because it's meant to be universal, right? It's not meant to be just a WordPressy thing. It's meant to be universal. So if it doesn't make sense to somebody in the UK, but it does to someone in the States, but it does to somebody in Israel, but it doesn't to somebody in Japan, then that's good feedback, because it needs to be fairly universal, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting you say about CSS. That's one of the things that really excites me about the theme.json, which is, I'll explain that. I remember when inline CSS, I didn't like inline CSS. I had such a gut reaction to the concept of inline CSS. It was I didn't like the idea. I was a CSS purist. However, what theme.json and the approach we're doing now does is beautiful, because it means we can have less, and I love it. I'm completely converted to the approach that we are doing within the editor. And I say that because I honestly think that it's so easy to trace stuff. It's so easy to know where things are. And by using theme.json, I don't have to have these files and files of CSS with not importance. I can respect the cascade. And I'm such a purist at heart about CSS.
They need to ban important. They should just ban the important tag. That's it. And then everyone has to do it properly. I
feel so old when I'm like, it's got cascade at the front for a reason. Right? But like, it's for that, like theme.json, it's such a beautiful file because it is that recipe, and it means I can declare this style that applies, and I don't, it's just really nice and a really elegant way of doing it. And I do still use preprocessor a little bit, but I don't have to use a preprocessor. I can use WordPress variables in that sense, which is kind of using one, I know, but I can use them that I then declare, and it's just so much more elegant, I think, and efficient. And for me, when I am creating a theme, being efficient about creating the theme and tracking things down is crucial. Palettes is such a beautiful thing for me, being able to control my colors, my palettes. How you can declare Google fonts now is amazing compared to how we used to be able to declare Google fonts as well. It's a different world.
Excellent, good.
I think what's interesting is that I never knew that each block had its own block JSON. So that knowing that tonight is like a real gem. I've just opened up one and I can see.
They're like my favorite things. I don't know why I like them so much. It's maybe I'm peculiar, but they're so good. There's so much good stuff in them.
It's a glimpse, isn't it? Because that was one frustration I had when I was looking at the play with it. Is the resource is new. I know, I get that. It's still being documented, but those are those frustrations where when you can't find something, you know that it's there somewhere. It's really easy. But one thing I discovered, that the theme JSON file doesn't work unless you have a version number. You know, that's really important. And I noticed in the core that you've got a version number, which is, so essentially in the theme JSON, you have to have version 1, right? For whatever reason, or it won't work. But in the core, it says version, well, it's got API version 2, but it's left out version. So I presume it's just slightly works in a slightly different way as a parameter, but because it's a block, I guess. But anyway, that was just something interesting I just noticed, because I didn't know it was even there before. So thank you for that.
And there also is like an automatic way of creating blocks now. Like it's create something. There's like a command that will do like a block skeleton, and it'll fill out. Like,
create blocks. Create block.
Oh, it's so good. So I'm completely diverging into blocks, but like I don't know. I've just done JSON loopy. It's just, I think, it's one of those tools that's understandable easier as well. I think we're maybe missing some of the easier error understanding with JSON, which will come, and some of the tools around that. But also, I think it's one of those access entry points. Like we're talking about, Janice, you were saying about learning. I think if you look in there, you can start to be like, oh, okay, that is that with that, does that with that. And you can start to connect how things work. And it makes kind of sense. But if you looked in some of the JavaScript files, it's like, I don't know, for me, I look in some of those and I'm like, I'm going in the other direction. That's really complicated.
Oh, that's interesting. So are you saying that when you do npx create block, whatever the command is, does it actually create a block JSON file as well for your own custom blocks?
I think that one does. I would check my notes suddenly.
That's okay. I'll play that.
On the block.
I'll have a look at that.
You missed my joke. I said I was on the block, so it's fine. Making really bad mum jokes. It's fine.
Sorry, I didn't miss it. I was just like looking at something on. So I was distracted. That's very cool. Well, I've definitely learned something tonight, even if it was just a bad joke. But so hopefully everybody's learned something. If you have any more questions, feel free to ask, or I'm happy to bring it to a close and stop the recording. But if people want to hang out and talk, entirely up to you. So at this point, I'm just going to say thank you to our speaker, and Thank you for all the people that attended. And thank you to for all your questions. I think it's been awesome. So thank you very much.